The young heir arrived at the estate early in the morning, the sun barely brushing the tips of the tall trees surrounding the mansion. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of anticipation, dread, and unease settling like a heavy weight. He had received a letter the night before, a legal document that confirmed his worst fear. The inheritance he had always assumed would be his, the family fortune, the property, the trust funds, had been quietly redirected, manipulated by relatives he had trusted. His mind raced, trying to understand how it was possible. How could the people he had considered family, the ones he had shared laughter, memories, and milestones with, betray him so completely? The audience feels the tension immediately, imagining the shock, the deep sense of injustice, and the personal humiliation building in his chest. As he approached the grand entrance, the large iron gates creaked softly in the breeze. He could see movement inside the estate, figures walking through the gardens, laughing, the very picture of smug satisfaction. His relatives, those who had cheated him out of what was rightfully his, moved with an air of arrogance, completely unaware of the storm brewing just outside. He paused for a moment, taking in their expressions, the way they carried themselves, and the sheer confidence they exuded. His chest tightened as anger mingled with disbelief. Every smile, every gesture, every triumphant glance they exchanged seemed to mock him silently, and yet he remained still, hiding the fire of determination burning within. The young heir walked slowly along the gravel driveway, letting the sounds of the estate, the distant clatter of servants, the soft rustle of leaves in the morning wind, and the faint laughter from the gardens, sink into his consciousness. He moved as if walking through a dream, where reality felt distorted, yet sharp edges of anger and betrayal cut through the haze. His hands clenched at his sides, fingers white, as he whispered to himself, "They think they've won. They have no idea what's coming." The audience feels a ripple of suspense, curious about what he will do next, eager to witness the unfolding of a meticulously planned revenge. He entered the main hall of the mansion, the polished marble floors gleaming beneath his steps. Portraits of ancestors stared down from the walls, as if observing the unfolding drama. The heir's mind swirled with memories of childhood visits, family dinners, and holidays spent in the very rooms that now symbolized betrayal. Every corner of the estate reminded him of trust broken, promises ignored, and the quiet manipulation that had allowed his relatives to seize control. He ran a hand along the smooth banister, his pulse quickening as he considered the enormity of what had been stolen from him. As he walked further into the estate, he glimpsed his relatives gathered in the sitting room, their faces illuminated by the soft morning light filtering through the windows. They were celebrating quietly, a toast shared, a smile exchanged, completely unaware of the presence of the heir who now observed them. His eyes narrowed, focusing on every detail, the subtle gestures of victory, the glances exchanged that confirmed their sense of superiority, the way they had believed themselves untouchable. Anger surged inside him, but he controlled it, breathing slowly, allowing the fire to fuel his resolve rather than cloud his judgment. The suspense intensified as the audience senses the brewing storm, knowing that something significant is about to unfold. He moved silently into a side corridor, keeping himself out of sight while observing the interactions of those who had betrayed him. The young heir noted everything, who seemed most confident, who whispered instructions, and which assets or documents they guarded most closely. Every detail became a piece of a larger puzzle, forming a mental map that would guide his plan. The audience feels the tension rise with every observation, imagining the meticulous care and patience required to reverse such a deep betrayal. His thoughts turned to the legal documents he had received, the exact mechanisms his relatives had used to manipulate the inheritance. He read the clauses repeatedly, analyzing them, memorizing every detail, every loophole, every clause that could be leveraged in his favor. He realized that while they had cheated him, they had underestimated his intelligence, his patience, and his determination. Each piece of evidence he had collected became a tool, a weapon of quiet power waiting for the right moment. The suspense built as the audience begins to anticipate how he will use this hidden advantage. The young heir recalled conversations, subtle admissions, and casual remarks made by his relatives over the years that revealed their priorities, the possessions they valued most, and the reputations they fiercely protected. Every memory became valuable intelligence, every casual comment a thread in the strategy he began to weave. He imagined the eventual confrontation, the shock on their faces when they realized that the one they had thought powerless had been quietly preparing for this exact moment. The audience feels the anticipation mounting, eager for the dramatic reversal. He paused in the library, the shelves filled with books and legal tomes, and allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He considered the betrayal in its entirety, not just the financial loss, but the emotional manipulation, the trust broken, and the humiliation endured. His fingers traced the spines of the books, grounding him, reinforcing his resolve. He would not act recklessly. Patience and precision were paramount. The suspense held firm, every heartbeat echoing in the reader's mind as they imagined the careful planning and strategic patience required for the revenge that would follow. Moving to a window overlooking the gardens, he observed his relatives once more. They laughed softly, unaware of the silent observer and the intelligence gathering behind the scenes. He noted their favorite areas of the estate, the prized possessions they displayed with pride, and the objects they seemed most protective of. These observations were seeds for the next phase of his plan, each detail carefully stored in his memory. The suspense builds as the audience begins to sense that a calculated and inevitable reversal is approaching, though the timing remains unknown. He turned away from the window, walking to a hidden desk in a private study, and began organizing his notes. Every document, every observation, every subtle advantage was catalogued meticulously. He created a timeline, a sequence of actions, and identified critical points where leverage could be applied. The young heir's mind worked tirelessly, combining legal knowledge, financial analysis, and psychological strategy into a coherent, unstoppable plan. The audience feels the anticipation grow. The seeds of revenge have been planted, the strategy is forming, and the payoff promises to be extraordinary. Hours passed as he meticulously drafted letters, prepared legal motions, and devised methods to reclaim not only what was stolen but also to ensure the relatives felt the weight of their actions. He considered the optics, the timing, the perfect moments to expose their arrogance and greed. Each idea was more precise than the last, each plan designed to maximize impact while minimizing risk. The suspense deepened, every subtlety could tip the balance, and the audience is drawn into the mental chess game being played silently by the heir. By the end of the day, the young heir had a comprehensive plan ready. He reviewed it repeatedly, imagining the reactions, anticipating objections, and preparing contingencies. The betrayal he had suffered was no longer a source of despair but a catalyst for meticulous, patient strategy. He whispered to himself once more, a promise and a warning. They think they have won. Soon they will understand the full cost of their deceit. The suspense peaks here, leaving the audience breathless, eager for the next chapter, imagining the unfolding of a brilliantly orchestrated revenge. The young heir finally allowed himself a brief rest, closing his eyes, but sleep did not come easily. His mind replayed the morning, analyzed the documents, rehearsed potential confrontations, and refined his strategy in detail. Every insult, every smug smile, every display of arrogance by his relatives fueled the fire of determination, sharpening the focus of his plan. The suspense remained, lingering in the shadows, as the audience senses the inevitability of the coming reversal and the meticulous intelligence behind it. By the time night fell over the estate, the young heir sat at his desk, surrounded by papers, legal texts, and carefully organized notes. The stage was set for a dramatic reversal. His relatives, confident and unaware, believed the battle was won. But he knew differently. Every observation, every subtle advantage, every carefully prepared step was about to converge into a plan that would reclaim not only his inheritance but also deliver a lesson in patience, intelligence, and precise revenge. The suspense was complete, the hook established, and the audience left on edge, anticipating the next phase of this thrilling journey from betrayal to ultimate triumph. After the shock of the betrayal, the young heir retreated to his private study, the heavy wooden door closing behind him with a definitive thud that echoed like a seal on his resolve. The room was dimly lit, the golden glow of a single desk lamp casting shadows across stacks of papers, legal books, and meticulously organized folders. He sank into the leather chair, heart still pounding, mind already racing with calculations, strategies, and contingencies. The documents he had received the night before lay in front of him, each one a testament to the cold, calculated way his relatives had manipulated the inheritance, diverting everything that had been rightfully his. Anger burned within him, but he channeled it into precision, patience, and methodical planning. The suspense was already mounting for the audience, who could feel the tension coiling like a spring ready to release. He opened the first folder, carefully reading through the legal jargon, noting every loophole, clause, and ambiguity. Each line of text became a piece of a puzzle he was beginning to assemble in his mind. How had they managed to manipulate the documents without raising suspicion? What small mistakes had they made that could now be exploited? Which assets were their most prized possessions, the ones they valued beyond reason? Every answer fueled the outline of a plan, and with each observation, the young heir's confidence grew. The audience, following his thought process, felt suspense building, curiosity tightening as they imagined how he would execute his next steps. He reached for his laptop and began cross-referencing financial records, property documents, and recent transactions. He mapped out the estate's holdings, noting discrepancies, overlooked clauses, and potential legal advantages. Every account, every asset, every small piece of evidence was catalogued and analyzed, a tool that would allow him to strike strategically. The suspense deepened as the audience realized that this was not a simple act of revenge. It was a carefully orchestrated operation, requiring intelligence, patience, and meticulous planning. The heir then considered the psychological aspect of his strategy. He reflected on his relatives' personalities, their arrogance, their greed, their overconfidence in the assumption that he had no knowledge or influence. Each characteristic became a lever he could use, a way to manipulate outcomes subtly without alerting them to the storm that was quietly forming. He imagined their expressions, the way they would react when minor disruptions in their carefully constructed dominance began to appear. Each imagined reaction intensified the suspense, making the audience eager to see the reveal. He began drafting a detailed sequence of steps, a timeline of actions that would slowly destabilize their sense of control. First, he would quietly gather allies within the network of advisors and lawyers connected to the estate, those who would not question his motives but who could subtly support his claims and actions. Next, he would identify the most vulnerable assets, the areas where his relatives' confidence was highest but their understanding weakest. Each small strike would accumulate, building leverage and tension until the final moment of confrontation. The suspense in the narrative became palpable, as the audience could envision the web of strategy growing in real time. Late into the night, he rehearsed potential scenarios in his mind. What if a relative noticed his subtle moves? What if an ally faltered? Or a loophole proved ineffective? He prepared contingencies for every eventuality, imagining multiple outcomes and ensuring that he would always remain steps ahead. The suspense tightened as the audience realized that the heir's plan was not reliant on luck but on careful intelligence and calculated precision. Every breath he took seemed to add weight to the tension, every small pause allowing anticipation to swell. He reviewed the documents that detailed ownership of the estate, the financial accounts, and the legal trusts. Each record was scrutinized for errors or weaknesses that could be leveraged. He identified patterns, subtle inconsistencies, and areas where his relatives had assumed too much control without verification. This deep understanding became the foundation of his strategy, a plan not only to reclaim his inheritance but to take it in a way that would demonstrate the full consequences of their deceit. The suspense grew with each discovery, as the audience could feel the stakes rising and the eventual payoff looming closer. Then he considered the assets they valued most, the prized paintings, the rare jewelry, the investment properties, the social reputation they guarded jealously. Each of these became a target in his mental strategy, pieces that could be claimed with subtle precision to maximize both financial recovery and psychological impact. He imagined the shock, disbelief, and regret on their faces as they realized the very things they prized most were slipping beyond their control. The audience could almost see it, feel it, and anticipate the emotional impact that would accompany the legal and financial maneuvering. He created a meticulous checklist, breaking down each step into manageable actions. Discreetly influence key advisors, prepare legal motions, leverage minor errors, subtly destabilize confidence, and finally execute the public reveal with undeniable proof. Each action was designed to be unseen until the moment it was revealed, each small success feeding into the larger crescendo of suspense. The audience, aware of the careful orchestration, felt a growing tension, imagining the domino effect that would soon unfold in the estate. The young heir paused, reflecting on the importance of patience. He understood that acting too quickly could alert his relatives, allowing them to defend their positions or obscure their weaknesses. Time and observation were his allies. Every day of careful preparation strengthened his position. He allowed himself a small smile, knowing that the suspense and tension were integral to the ultimate impact. The audience, in turn, experienced the thrill of anticipation, imagining the quiet storm that was about to strike. He then reviewed all gathered evidence once more, confirming that his plan was airtight. Every document, every record, every minor discrepancy had been accounted for. Every legal loophole had been identified. Every ally had been carefully cultivated. The suspense reached a peak, as the audience could feel the inevitability of the coming confrontation, yet remained uncertain of how exactly the dramatic reversal would unfold. Finally, as the night grew deep and the estate slept, the young heir allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He had transformed anger and betrayal into a calculated strategy, and each piece of intelligence, each observation, and every meticulously planned move had created a web of suspense that would soon trap his cheating relatives. He whispered to himself, "They think they have won. Tomorrow, they will learn the cost of their deceit." The suspense was perfectly set, the hook firmly established, and the audience left on edge, eager to witness the unfolding of a masterfully executed revenge. The young heir spent the next few days moving quietly, deliberately, through the estate and the networks surrounding it, like a shadow passing unseen, yet leaving subtle traces of influence everywhere he went. He observed, listened, and noted patterns in his relatives' behavior, the way they managed their finances, their prized possessions, and even their casual interactions with staff and advisors. Every smile they shared, every confident glance, every subtle hint of arrogance became data in his mind, building the framework for the next phase of his plan. He began implementing small strikes, actions so subtle that no one suspected the hand behind them, yet carefully designed to erode their sense of control. The suspense mounted as the audience could feel the tension growing, imagining the web of influence being spun in silence. He started by subtly influencing the advisors and lawyers who had worked for his relatives for years. Quiet questions, gentle suggestions, and casual remarks about inconsistencies in the accounts or documents were enough to plant seeds of doubt. Advisors who had once unquestioningly followed his relatives' orders began to pay closer attention, noticing details that had previously been overlooked. The young heir did not reveal himself. He remained a phantom, a silent strategist, allowing small errors and overlooked weaknesses to emerge. The audience feels the suspense tighten, knowing that every unnoticed action is setting the stage for the ultimate reveal. Next, he targeted minor but critical assets. He discovered accounts that had been mismanaged, investments that had been neglected, and properties whose valuations had been inflated without proper documentation. Quietly, he leveraged these weaknesses, ensuring that small problems would appear at precisely the right moment to destabilize his relatives' confidence. The audience experiences a rising tension, understanding that each minor disruption is a carefully calculated step toward the larger climax. Even within the estate, he began orchestrating subtle psychological strikes. Priceless items that his relatives considered untouchable were documented meticulously, and small reminders of their vulnerabilities were left to be discovered accidentally. An assistant would misplace a key document. A minor discrepancy in an account statement would be noticed by a junior staff member, and whispers of errors would begin circulating. All of this appeared coincidental. Yet the heir knew exactly how to use these events to undermine confidence and sow uncertainty. Suspense built with every seemingly accidental mishap, each one another piece of the puzzle that the audience could sense forming, though the full picture remained hidden. He also exploited the relatives' pride. Knowing how much they valued their reputation, he orchestrated situations where they would inadvertently make small mistakes in public, all while remaining unseen himself. A miscalculated investment, a poorly timed meeting, a subtly incorrect report, each became evidence that their control was slipping, all while he maintained an air of invisibility. The audience feels the thrill of anticipation, imagining the slow unraveling of power that had been assumed secure, wondering how the climax would expose the full extent of their vulnerability. Each day, he reviewed the outcomes of his small strikes, adjusting his approach, ensuring that every action was calibrated for maximum effect. He remained patient, never rushing, knowing that the suspense, tension, and careful timing were key to a successful final reveal. Each small success reinforced his confidence and control, and each subtle failure provided new information to refine his strategy. The audience is drawn into the meticulous unfolding, sensing the inevitable convergence of these small victories toward the ultimate confrontation. Meanwhile, the relatives remained oblivious. Their confidence in their own cleverness blinded them to the silent erosion of their authority. They celebrated minor successes, congratulated each other on perceived wins, and continued to flaunt their assumed dominance. The suspense increased as the audience, aware of the young heir's invisible influence, watched the looming consequences of overconfidence build. Every casual gesture of pride, every smug remark, became another tool for him, another advantage to be leveraged when the moment came. The young heir also built quiet alliances among those who had influence over financial and legal matters. Through casual conversations, carefully phrased questions, and subtle hints, he gained the support of key individuals without revealing his intentions. Each ally became a reinforcement of his strategy, a way to ensure that when the final reveal arrived, the impact would be overwhelming and undeniable. The suspense was palpable, the tension rising as the audience imagined the network of silent support silently aligning for the climactic moment. By the end of the week, small victories had accumulated. Minor financial corrections, strategic advice taken without question, overlooked mistakes highlighted at the right time. All these acts were invisible to his relatives but powerful in aggregate. The young heir stood back mentally, reviewing the results of his quiet strikes, noting the cracks appearing in the foundations of their assumed control. Every subtle disruption, every unnoticed manipulation, every carefully planted seed of doubt contributed to a crescendo of suspense that would culminate in the final, dramatic confrontation. He paused one evening, observing the estate from a distance. His relatives moved confidently, unaware that each step, each small victory he had orchestrated, had been nudging them closer to a moment of reckoning. Their smug expressions, once infuriating, now served to heighten the tension, the anticipation, and the eventual satisfaction that the audience would feel when the full reversal unfolded. He whispered to himself, a quiet vow, every move is in place, soon, everything they value will be mine. The suspense peaked, leaving the audience eager, their hearts racing in anticipation of the inevitable dramatic climax. The day of the confrontation arrived, and the young heir walked through the estate gates with calm precision, his steps deliberate, each one echoing the quiet confidence he had cultivated over weeks of careful planning. The relatives, unaware of the silent storm that had been brewing around them, continued their routine, moving through the gardens, laughing softly, and basking in their assumed victory. The audience feels the suspense immediately, knowing that everything they believe about the balance of power is about to be shattered. The young heir's eyes scanned the estate, taking in every detail. The prized paintings on the walls, the rare jewelry displayed in glass cases, the accounts and investments they considered untouchable. Each observation was a strategic note in his mental map, a chess move in a game only he fully understood. He entered the main hall, the polished marble floors reflecting his determined stride. Servants and staff glanced curiously at him, sensing a difference in his demeanor, though unaware of the depths of his plan. His relatives, gathered in the grand sitting room, continued their chatter, oblivious to the precise orchestration unfolding around them. The suspense thickened with every step, as the audience imagines the collision of arrogance and unseen strategy, the tension mounting as the moment of reckoning approaches. The young heir approached the relatives slowly, deliberately, his calm presence commanding attention without aggression. He placed a stack of documents on the table, the rustle of paper drawing the eyes of everyone present. Whispers began as they noticed the folder, and a ripple of uncertainty passed through the room. He opened the documents carefully, revealing evidence of their financial mismanagement, legal missteps, and overlooked errors that he had quietly leveraged over the past weeks. The boss of the family, the one who had orchestrated the theft of his inheritance, leaned forward, eyes narrowing, already sensing the unexpected challenge to his assumed dominance. The young heir spoke softly but firmly, his voice steady, carrying the weight of preparation and intelligence. "There are discrepancies here," he said, gesturing to the documents. "These investments, these assets, and these decisions, none of them align with the legal and financial obligations as they should. Some choices have consequences far greater than they realize." The relatives exchanged uneasy glances, the first seeds of doubt appearing. The suspense surged, the tension in the room almost suffocating, as the audience feels every heartbeat, every second stretching toward the inevitable confrontation. He continued, calmly presenting the evidence, each point precise, each assertion undeniable. "I have reviewed every account, every document, every trust and property agreement. The mistakes are clear. The power you assumed was yours is, in fact, incomplete. Decisions have been made without the proper authority, and the consequences are unavoidable." His words landed like calculated strikes, destabilizing the smug confidence of his relatives. The audience can feel the suspense heightening with every sentence, imagining the shock, disbelief, and rising panic in the faces before him. The relatives attempted to interject, voices rising, trying to assert control, to maintain the illusion of power they had clung to. But the young heir's calm gaze and precise knowledge silenced them instantly. He anticipated every argument, had prepared for every denial, and remained unshakable, his authority derived from meticulous research, strategic patience, and unseen leverage. The suspense peaked, as the audience experiences the tension of the confrontation, knowing that the quiet mastermind is several moves ahead. He paused deliberately, letting the weight of his presence settle over the room, the silence emphasizing the undeniable truth of his words. Every eye fixed on him, every breath held in anticipation. Then, with calm deliberation, he revealed his ownership stake, the portion of the estate and assets that had been overlooked or underestimated. "I am not powerless," he said softly, yet every word struck with precision. "The legal and financial authority that controls this estate rests with me in ways you fail to recognize. The consequences of your actions will now become clear." Shock rippled through the room. Faces turned pale, jaws slackened, and the relatives, for the first time, felt vulnerability. The arrogance that had fueled their previous triumphs crumbled as they realized the young heir's invisible hand had been controlling the situation from the shadows. The audience feels the suspense at its peak, sensing the reversal of power, the quiet humiliation, and the impending unraveling of the cheater's confidence. The young heir walked slowly around the table, letting his gaze meet each relative, observing their reactions. Confusion, disbelief, and the dawning recognition of their mistake. Each subtle expression was noted, catalogued in his mind, part of the performance that would ensure maximum psychological impact. The assets you prized most, the control you believed absolute, are now within reach of their rightful owner. He continued calmly, reinforcing the tension, the anticipation, and the ultimate payoff. He presented the final documents, revealing the scope of his influence. Accounts, properties, and investments legally and strategically redirected to his authority. The relatives' protests faltered as each revelation landed, undeniable, precise, and meticulously prepared. The suspense transformed into shock, the tension now a tangible weight in the room, as the audience witnesses the total reversal of fortune. Every step of the young heir's patient strategy, every small strike over the past weeks, culminated in this moment of confrontation, leaving his relatives stunned, humbled, and vulnerable. Finally, he stood back, calm and composed, allowing the silence to emphasize the magnitude of the situation. The relatives struggled to comprehend the depth of their error, their assumed dominance dismantled not through aggression, but through intelligence, patience, and strategic execution. The suspense lingered as the audience realized the brilliance of the plan. Every calculated move, every unseen action, every quiet strike had built toward this inevitable, breathtaking confrontation. The young heir stood in the center of the grand sitting room, the documents carefully spread before him, his posture calm but commanding. The relatives, once smug and self-assured, were now visibly tense, sensing that something monumental was about to unfold. Their eyes darted nervously between each other, whispers barely audible as uncertainty began to creep into their expressions. The audience feels the suspense tighten, their hearts beating faster with every passing second, as they sense that the tide of power is about to shift dramatically. He began to speak, his voice low, measured, and deliberate, carrying authority without aggression. "There is more than one way to hold control," he said, eyes sweeping over the room, meeting each relative's gaze with quiet intensity. "You may have thought you had taken everything from me, but you overlooked one critical fact. Authority and ownership are not always what they appear to be." A hush fell over the room. Even the staff paused, sensing the tension in the air, the quiet but undeniable shift of power. The suspense was palpable, the audience hanging on each word, imagining the shock that would soon strike the relatives. He picked up a folder from the table, opening it carefully. Legal documents, financial statements, and detailed records of asset ownership were revealed. The relatives leaned forward instinctively, eyes widening as they glimpsed the information. Each document laid bare the truth. The young heir's rightful inheritance, cleverly hidden, meticulously safeguarded, and legally undeniable, had remained intact despite their attempts at manipulation. Every number, every clause, every signature was a precise strike, a calculated revelation designed to maximize impact. The audience feels the tension mount, imagining their astonishment and disbelief. "This," he continued calmly, gesturing to the documents, "is not just about recovering what was taken. It is about demonstrating that actions have consequences. Every attempt to deceive, to cheat, to manipulate, every single one of those acts has been accounted for." He paused deliberately, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. The relatives swallowed nervously, the air thick with suspense, their faces pale as the realization of their misjudgment sank in. The audience feels the anticipation peak, every silent second stretching into heightened tension. He then revealed the most striking part of his plan. The assets that his relatives had valued most, the jewels, properties, and investments they had flaunted as untouchable, were now legally under his control. He had executed subtle strategies in the background, quietly influencing advisors, uncovering loopholes, and leveraging small errors they had made over time. Each carefully orchestrated step had led to this precise moment, and the revelation was as dramatic as it was inevitable. The relatives' expressions shifted from confusion to shock, their mouths slightly agape, unable to speak, their arrogance utterly dismantled. The young heir's eyes scanned the room, meeting each relative's gaze with a calm intensity. "Everything you thought you valued most, the possessions and control you assumed were secure, are now within the boundaries of the law and strategy that I have prepared meticulously. Your triumph was temporary. My patience and intelligence have prevailed." The words struck like lightning. Gasps filled the room, whispers turned to murmurs of astonishment, and the relatives' prior confidence dissolved into disbelief and silent dread. The suspense was now almost unbearable, the audience fully immersed in the moment, imagining the psychological impact of the revelation. He continued, reinforcing the lesson without raising his voice or showing anger. "This is not revenge for the sake of cruelty. This is a demonstration of foresight, strategy, and the consequences of underestimating those you think powerless. Mockery, arrogance, and deceit have limits. Patience, preparation, and quiet intelligence always have the upper hand." The relatives shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, realizing too late that they had misjudged someone they assumed was weak. The suspense was electric, almost tangible, the tension gripping every observer as the transformation of power unfolded before their eyes. The young heir allowed a pause, letting every eye in the room fully register the shift. He observed the mixture of shock, regret, and awe in their expressions, savoring the precise timing of his plan. He had orchestrated every element. The subtle strikes over weeks, the careful observation of weaknesses, the quiet accumulation of leverage, all converging now in a powerful, undeniable reveal. The audience feels the full weight of suspense peak, knowing that the humiliation once inflicted upon him had been fully inverted, leaving the relatives humbled and exposed. Finally, he closed the folder with deliberate calm, standing tall, exuding quiet authority. The relatives were silent, stunned into stillness, unable to dispute the facts laid before them. Every small victory, every unnoticed action, every calculated step had been validated in this moment. The suspense slowly transitioned into awe and astonishment as the audience comprehended the brilliance of the plan. The young heir had turned betrayal into triumph, humiliation into empowerment, and deception into a lesson that would linger in the minds of those who had attempted to cheat him. He looked around the room one last time, eyes steady, voice calm, and said, "Let this be a reminder. Underestimating someone, mocking them, or thinking power is absolute can have consequences you never anticipate. Strategy, patience, and intelligence always prevail." His words resonated, leaving the room in stunned silence, every listener aware of the full gravity of what had just occurred. The suspense resolved satisfyingly, the audience fully immersed in the dramatic reversal, the complete revelation of power, and the mastery with which the young heir had executed his plan. The young heir stood quietly in the center of the grand sitting room, the weight of every eye upon him, his calm demeanor radiating a quiet authority that no one could challenge. The relatives, once smug and confident, now slumped in their chairs, their arrogance evaporated under the revelation of his meticulous planning and undeniable legal power. Their faces were pale, jaws slack, eyes wide with disbelief, unable to comprehend fully how their carefully constructed world had crumbled without a single act of aggression from him. The suspense hung thick in the room, almost suffocating, as the audience felt the tension release gradually into a mixture of awe and astonishment. The young heir moved with deliberate purpose, stepping closer to the center table where the legal documents and records of reclaimed assets lay neatly organized. His voice, calm and measured, carried effortlessly across the room. "This," he said, gesturing to the spread of evidence, "is the result of patience, observation, and careful strategy. Every decision, every asset, every trust and account has been reviewed and secured. What you believed was untouchable has now returned to its rightful owner." The relatives' mouths opened, closed, and opened again, searching for words, but finding none. The audience felt the suspense peak, caught between the thrill of the revenge and the sheer elegance of its execution. He walked slowly around the room, eyes scanning each relative, taking in their reactions, shock, disbelief, and the first hints of humility creeping into their expressions. He allowed a long, silent pause, letting the weight of the moment settle, magnifying the psychological impact. Each second of silence carried power, each heartbeat resonated with the inevitability of the reversal, and the audience could feel every nuance, every tension, every unspoken acknowledgement of the shift in dominance. His calm composure contrasted sharply with their stunned confusion, turning the victory into a lesson in both intelligence and strategy. Without raising his voice or showing malice, he continued, "This is not about revenge for the sake of cruelty. It is a reminder that arrogance, deceit, and underestimation have consequences. Power and respect are not given. They are earned through patience, intelligence, and careful observation." His words echoed through the room, hitting each listener with undeniable truth. The relatives' attempts to interject were silenced by the authority inherent in his calm, precise delivery. The suspense remained, electric and alive, as the audience witnessed the complete dismantling of their overconfidence and the emergence of rightful authority. The young heir then outlined the reclaimed assets in detail: properties, investments, valuable possessions, and strategic holdings, all restored under his control. Every explanation was deliberate, highlighting not only the legality of his claims but the meticulous planning that had allowed him to act without confrontation until the moment of revelation. The relatives shifted nervously, glancing at one another, the tension palpable. The audience experienced the thrill of seeing the layers of strategy revealed, the suspense giving way to awe as the young heir's plan came full circle. Finally, he allowed a moment of quiet reflection, standing tall, eyes steady, a faint smile of satisfaction forming. The room, once filled with smug confidence and arrogance, now held a hushed atmosphere of respect, astonishment, and reluctant admiration. Co-workers and staff, who had silently witnessed the drama, exchanged astonished looks, their previous assumptions shattered. The suspense resolved into a satisfying climax, as the audience could appreciate the cleverness, patience, and strategic brilliance that had guided every move. He concluded softly, his voice calm but resonant. Let this be a lesson, not in humiliation, but in awareness, patience, and strategy. Underestimating anyone, or assuming absolute control without foresight, leads to consequences that cannot be ignored. The relatives, humbled and introspective, absorbed the magnitude of the message, recognizing the skill and intelligence of the young heir who had orchestrated every step with precision. The suspense fully resolved, leaving the audience with the satisfying closure of justice served and cleverness rewarded. As the day continued, the young heir moved through the estate with quiet dignity, acknowledging staff, observing reactions, and ensuring the impact of his actions was understood without arrogance or unnecessary confrontation. His relatives, now subdued, were left to reflect on the lessons of patience, strategy, and humility. Every small glance, every whispered acknowledgement, reinforced the shift in power and the completeness of his victory. The suspense, now transformed into satisfaction, lingered in the audience's mind, leaving them impressed by the intelligence and precision with which the young heir had executed his plan. By evening, the estate had returned to a semblance of calm, but the impact of the young heir's actions remained indelible. The relatives, humbled and thoughtful, understood that their attempt at deception and arrogance had been dismantled with subtlety, strategy, and careful observation. The young heir, calm and composed, had transformed humiliation into triumph, betrayal into strategic opportunity, and injustice into a lesson that resonated far beyond the walls of the estate. The audience experienced a complete emotional journey, from suspense and tension to climax and resolution, fully engaged and satisfied with the intricate, carefully orchestrated revenge. Finally, as the sun set behind the estate, casting golden light over the manicured gardens, the young heir walked through the halls with quiet confidence. The weight of betrayal had been transformed into empowerment. The suspense, carefully maintained through patient observation and strategic action, had reached a flawless resolution. The relatives would remember this day, the audience would feel the full emotional arc, and the story concluded with a perfect balance of triumph, intelligence, and satisfying closure.